Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Lonely Wrist. Today we have John tuning in from Bespoke Watch Projects. Say hello, introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. Great to have you. Tell us about Bespoke Watch Projects. Tell us what's so special. Obviously, you don't need an introduction to me, but a part of the podcast is bringing awareness for brands maybe that don't have such a mainstream outlet. So tell us about Bespoke Watch Projects and tell us how it started.
Absolutely. Well, my name's John McConnico. I'm the founder, designer, watchmaker, mad scientist of dials. I started Bespoke Watch Projects approximately 10 years ago, getting right up to that 10-year mark. There's a little bit of a ambiguity there because when I first started out, it truly was a personal project. I come from a design and art background. I was a creative director for years in agencies. I've done product development in the past. I studied architecture in art school years ago. So I've kind of had my hands in a lot of different creative things. I've been a watch collector. I have story like a lot of other folks that as a kid, I collected watches, had that interest, and then probably seriously started collecting watches in college, right after college. So 90s, I'm dating myself. Been a collector a long time. And so approximately 10, 11, 12 years ago, started the process of kind of learning some of the core kind of watchmaking skills, a lot of the dexterity around assembling watches and just, I knew some of the basics, but more of the hands-on stuff. And at that point, it really was a desire really to make my own watch. The irony in that is that even though I come from a creative background and kind of very design driven and art influenced, at that time, I really was kind of more into kind of very simple tool watches. And my first release was actually a Flieger, a pilot watch, putting my own spin on it. So actually I did a Sunray, I call it the Sunray Flieger. And at that point, didn't even really have a brand name. So I was kind of tinkering. I was coming up with my own spin on things and then sharing on social media. And then within about 18 months, it went from being kind of this total side project to something that I was openly sharing and then started getting orders. And a lot of my friends and kind of some of those early watch groups and just other friends who are watch nerds, wanted a bespoke watch. Essentially, they said, "Yeah, I'd love what you're working on. Could you do something special for me?" And that was really part of the thrill for me was that the fact that I'm touching every watch, the fact that I'm making it for someone. I've always loved gift giving, so it's kind of like that little bit of the endorphin rush you get from that. Um, and then it really did kind of transition pretty quickly at that point. Within about 6 months, I said, "Okay, I kind of have something here. You know, uh, I should formalize this. So what the heck do I call myself? Well, I guess I'm doing bespoke watch projects." um,
Okay.
so it really was kind of a literal term. And it actually, at the time, I had a design firm I'd founded with a buddy of mine, and we were always into kind of this very kind of modernist naming methodology about what we do, influenced by kind of this form is function kind of approach. And so for me, naming this kind of watch pursuit really was about, while my name is associated with it, while I make it very apparent that I am the person creating the watches, that it really is as much about this collaboration with every client, every customer. So I tell people I'm kind of like an architect for the wrist. It's about this kind of interaction. It's about this collaboration. I do make ready-made pieces, which I rotate on my site, as well as make for events such as Wind Up and Intersect and a lot of the events that I do. So even if a person buys a ready-made piece, they're still unique. Each build is unique. Each dial has a certain kind of unique quality to it. So for me, it's really always been about that kind of specialness, that relationship with each customer, and the kind of uniqueness of every watch. Every watch is essentially this little piece of art or this little house that I'm making. And then fast forward a few years from that start, I would say within 3 or 4 years after that, I was prototyping and doing stuff. I said, I really want to do something different. I don't want to do an homage. I don't want to do kind of my own spin on an existing historical design, even though I love a lot of vintage stuff. So really the secret sauce for me was bringing in the dial production in-house. So it's something I left out. I'm in California. So I'm in Oakland, California in the Bay Area, and have a studio. So I actually have kind of a two-sided studio, the dirty side and the clean side.
Yeah.
And it's really more akin to, it's kind of like a combination of an architecture studio and an artist studio, as opposed to kind of your traditional watch company. And the reason for that is really that, for me, it's that process of, I've always done fine art over the years as well. So I incorporate a lot of those processes into my watchmaking. All of my dials that I currently offer are what I call intaglio dials, which intaglio printing, which comes out of fine art, that is actually like engraved surface that you print with. So when I created my dial kind of techniques a few years ago, it's about this kind of tactile quality that all my dials have. So they're engraved. They're actually not traditionally printed. And I use custom patinas and finishes and surfaces on all of my dials. So that kind of adds to the uniqueness of each piece, the uniqueness of the dials. I'm constantly doing batches of them, kind of like, a potter would do pottery, or, some of the techniques I use are same I used in paintings years ago. So in some ways it's kind of been full circle. I've been around for a while. I've done a lot of shows, and, I'm kind of I have a unique profile in terms of an independent brand or micro brand because of the way I produce things. But I've found that as the years have gone on, that the kind of design background I have, the art background I have, really does bleed into the watchmaking, and it's kind of like one creative bucket, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's it's been kind of an interesting journey. That's still it's still an interesting journey. So
Yeah, I mean, when I was reading about you, doing my homework, right, doing my background check, um, I saw you worked with, big box brands, Apple, Sony. I mean,
mhm.
and those are brands that take design, unique approaches to design,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And everything has a practical design touch. I guess I don't know if that's
Mhm.
the right way to explain it, but
Mhm.
the laptop folds in a certain way. The Sony camera screen opens in this certain way for this certain reason. Everything has a practical design utility, and
Mhm.
so how is that process been like from designing consumer products to designing wearable art? You know?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because surprisingly, a lot of people ask me about, A, how the heck do you get into watchmaking? And B, kind of, how long did it take you to learn watchmaking? And I like to say, well, there's no such thing as really learning all of watchmaking. It's kind of like you want to learn a new piece of software. You learn the 6 things you want to know, and then it's much easier to learn the next 60, right? But for someone truly to say that they know everything is usually not true.
Yeah,
so,
full of it.
uh, I'm very humble when it comes to my kind of watchmaking expertise. I've been very lucky over the years to learn a lot, and have a couple people who are older than I am who have given me a lot of tips along the way, and a lot of it is kind of practice and dexterity, and just like learning an instrument or something. But the watchmaking side of it, what's interesting is kind of the product, the engineering side of it. I felt like in some ways I was extremely lucky, and that came together pretty quickly in terms of my understanding of it, being able to learn more, and then rely on a lot of other people to help me along the way. And it's no coincidence, just like I think we're all aware of, is that with the rise of micro brands, independent brands, and small brands, that production has changed extremely a lot in the last 10 years. The capabilities that we have in terms of being able to source parts or get parts made, collaborate with other people to get parts made, that kind of thing has changed a lot. So I think in some ways my timing was lucky. But what's interesting is that, back to your question, is designing something for the wrist. Um, like my wife, for example, she's in fashion. She has her own apparel brand. We both have, an art school background, design background. I think through osmosis, I've kind of learned a lot about apparel design, just having a lot of friends in that space, even though I have not designed apparel per se. So kind of like the physicality part of that, I think, is something I had kind of just an awareness about, and maybe just being all of us who are kind of watch lovers and collectors, I think there's a certain awareness about how the watch fits, how it curves, and hugs the wrist, and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a certain kind of intuitiveness to that. But I think surprisingly, I couldn't have predicted just the kind of tangent I would take in terms of fine art kind of influences and off-roading a little bit in terms of doing different finishes and experiments with finishes. So I think a lot of my time over the last 5 or 6 years has been kind of these non-traditional methods, and really, pushing myself. So I'm that way, whether it's, whether it's creating a painting, whether it's building a piece of furniture, whatever I'm working on, I kind of like to push myself kind of beyond my comfort zone a little bit. Or I think Charles Eames had a great quote about kind of playing jazz with something in the process. Like when you're designing, like you allow yourself to kind of have a little bit of flexibility. And so I tell people that, with some of my watch styles, for example, they came about not because I had a premeditated design, or concept, but because I kind of embraced the process and the materials, just like you would do a painting, So a lot of my pieces are, ones that I perfected that were, different lacquers and enamels and finishes and kind of plating testing that I've done that I wouldn't have necessarily known to do beforehand. So that's kind of part of the exciting part of it, is that I think I rely a lot on my background in product development and art direction and other things. But I even surprised myself at how much of the stuff pushing forward is the unknown. It's the stuff that you kind of discover in the process. And I think that with any kind of interesting artist or interesting designer or even brand, I feel like that's a common thread, that you find the more interesting folks are the ones who allow themselves to kind of take on influences and experiment, and kind of come up with a new destination, for lack of a better term.
Right. And obviously I'm a creative too, right? So here I have a podcast, I have a YouTube channel, I do all the filming, I do all the editing, I do all that, photography, we do all that. You find yourself grounded in like your base art form or creativity platform, right? So like, I'll venture off and do a podcast like I'm doing now. And then I'm like, oh, I come from filmmaking. Filmmaking is my background, right? But it takes a lot of the same principles of narrative direction. Like we have to keep this story going or people will not listen to this podcast.
That's the structure that you have. That story.
And so I understand the process of structure, linear and nonlinear storytelling, yada yada yada. But you find yourself as a creative, of course, like every time I do a new project, like if I get a new watch or whatever to do a review, it's like I'm starting over from zero every single time. Like I know how to do it, but I don't, like everybody's like, oh, well, what are you gonna do? And I'm like, I don't know. Like I have no idea. But
you kind of let the story speak to you in a way.
Yeah, you just you know how to push off. Like it's like you know how to push off, and how to get going, but you never know where you're going to end up. And like the finish. I don't know where the finish line is. So, but that's just a part of being a creative, right? And
then there's I like to say, like, if you're doing a painting, and the same thing with anything, with a story, film, like you're only done when you choose to stop touching it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, exactly.
That's it.
And you could take every Hollywood blockbuster that's done hundreds of millions of dollars a year and re-edit it and tell a different story. You could do that for the rest of your life. Right.
Yeah.
So it's hard, but it's definitely fun to come back to that, and like in watchmaking, right? We're talking about watchmaking here, but look at like Cartier, right? Cartier is one of the best watchmakers in the world, and they sell a lot of watches because they come from fashion, they come from jewelry. So they're more experimental with shapes and materials and precious metals and they can shape things a lot differently
Hmm.
than IWC or what you know
Yeah,
what I mean?
and their heritage. I mean, they have
Exactly.
such a history to pull on in terms of kind of what inspires them, what they do with materials, for
Yeah.
example. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, I mean, yeah, it's just like all the brands, they kind of pull from that.
And
So
we
it's kind of like you said, it's that um, core part of every brand's DNA, that they
yeah,
pull on.
and if you think about the world, I think is especially the watch world is upside down, right? Cuz you think of luxury, right? Luxury is not mass market. Luxury is not mass production, right? So in the sense here, right? Um, you're an artisan, right? So
Mhm.
you have the ability to put together, in theory, a more beautiful watch than the most luxurious, prestigious watchmaker because you have the attention to detail, right? You may not have the same resources, the same money, right, to do what they do,
Yeah.
but you're only limited by your creativity.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point because I had a conversation a while back last year with someone, in-depth discussion about what luxury means. Um, and for me, I think it's changed over the years, but luxury to me is not the kind of canned concept of it's got to cost this amount, it's got to have this. Obviously, there's a certain kind of rarity to things that are luxurious. But in the world we live in now, it's such a kind of as you know, it's like, okay, we're going to release 500 of these, whatever it might be, a purse, a watch, boots, whatever. And there's a rarity that they kind of build into that to bank on the fact that means luxury. And obviously,
Right.
materials are a part of it too, and they can be beautifully made. But for me, luxury is, and this is especially true as I get older. Luxury are those things they can be time, they can be experiences, they can be your relationship to an object, whether it is a $1 object or $1 million object. Um, for me, it's a love for design and art. So if I find something that really, really speaks to me, whether it's a watch, whatever it is, it's almost agnostic of price.
Yeah.
So I kind of, in some ways, as I've gotten deeper into it, I approach my own watches and product like that. Is that I want it to be an accessible heirloom, number one, because half my customers are, I would say, watch people, collectors who see it as a great value and something unique. Other half of my customers are maybe they're kind of getting up to that point where they want their first kind of watch that's different, or maybe it's their first mechanical watch, or maybe it's they've been saving up for something special. I never want to exclude those folks ever. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I always feel like the kind of idea of the accessible heirloom and that luxury is something that really can transition. Yes, there can be very expensive luxury items, and for good reason. Um, but also there can be ones that are very accessible in a lot of ways. And to me, that's no less luxury. And it's kind of how I look at the world now too. It's like when you're inspired by something, I was like, okay, this thing or this experience is really, really special. That's kind of living a luxurious life in some ways when you have that kind of relationship to that, to things that, it's not necessarily just price. So I
Yeah.
think people's perception is changing a little bit. Even in the watch space, when I meet people at shows, I feel like what we all look for as collectors, for example, um, even if someone can afford a watch that costs XXXX, that, it doesn't mean that they don't appreciate something that is also
No.
affordable. Yeah. So
No,
it's,
and I actually sold some of the most expensive watches in the world.
hmm
I worked in a retail environment for about a year,
hmm
um, in the watch industry, and I got to see all avenues, all sectors. I got to learn about the retail experience. Bringing brands in, doing events and all this stuff. I learned about all of it, but there becomes a point in a life where you transcend as a watch collector. I've never ever vocally said this, but this is the platform to do it if it's
Of
my own.
course.
Right?
Yeah.
But people transcend luxury products where
Mhm.
they're like, I met a guy, for example, that came in and he was looking for a Grand Seiko,
Mhm.
and he had one of the rarest Pateks on in the world. Like
Yeah.
maybe a $800,000 Patek.
Mm-hmm.
But his philosophy was like, yeah, I'd much rather wear this Grand Seiko because I know it's a quality product
Yeah.
and it's a fraction of the price, and I have probably a stronger connection. He was an Asian
Hmm.
gentleman, but he had a stronger connection with Grand Seiko than he did even his rarest Pateks.
Interesting.
And so people come full circle where, and you could look at fashion, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Kanye West, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like look at his clothing line. Like the people that come out of his fashion, like his fashion shows look like homeless people, right?
Yeah, he's definitely blurring the lines between all disciplines, and yeah,
Yeah, like ultra high net worth, and so that gap of luxury and
yeah,
in quality is shrinking, or should I say that luxury and design quality are shrinking.
Mm-hmm.
But something that really interests me is you have mentioned that a wristwatch is an extension of somebody's personality.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to elaborate on this philosophy and how it drives like your design.
Yeah.
So pretend that I'm a customer. I'm coming
Mm-hmm.
to you. Hey, John, I want to watch.
Yep.
Like before you just say, okay, cool, you can buy this, or the bespoke side of it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get to know you before I build a product for you. Like how does that work, right? So,
and that's funny that you say that, because that has happened where I've literally met people at events where they've contacted me, and if they were local, for example, it's not unusual. People in the Bay Area will find me. They hadn't heard of me before, but they'll see me at a show, or they'll find me and we'll meet for a beer, coffee. I even had that in New York when I was there before. Someone actually went through my website through the chat, and they were actually shocked that a human actually answered the web chat. So I think freaked them out a little bit. But we actually ended up meeting up. So it's not unusual that, like I said, kind of that architect relationship, that it starts out with a conversation. It starts out over a beer. And sometimes customers don't even know exactly what they want. Like I said, half or maybe 60% of my customers are watch people. They have a certain affinity to certain things, whether it's, hey, I love a California dial. I love a sector dial, which I'm a sucker for a sector. Or they love a Roman, they might have already some kind of preconceived ideas of what they want or what they think they want. What's interesting is that in that journey, usually what I'll say is, here's stuff I'm working on, first of all. Sometimes that kind of drives the conversation. And actually people seeing the watch in the metal, to actually see a dial, for example, one that I'm working on, I'm always working on new dials and new finishes. So sometimes just bringing that along to kind of show people, and you can't replicate that on the web very easily in terms of texture and surface pattern, that kind of thing. That will inspire a lot of conversation. But I find that some of it is, to your point about kind of the personality and getting to the person, sometimes it's influences in unexpected places. Like, for example, I've started doing automotive editions, which I kind of formalized it recently, but I've been doing it for, 3 years now, probably. Where someone found me at a show and he has a car that he races that, long story short, I ended up designing something where I'm pulling motifs that are in the dash cluster of the car, kind of mimicking certain elements without being too matchy or
right.
thematic in kind of a cheesy way, pulling design motifs from that, sourcing leather for the strap that complemented the interior, actually matching the automotive paint of his car and actually using that on the engraved dial.
Amazing.
So that's kind of shows a level of customization or bespokedom that is kind of one side of it, in terms of really, really going deep in terms of, okay, he was all about, his racing and kind of having a timepiece that captured that. I've also had a client who's an architect, and we shared a lot of similar philosophies in terms of love of modernist design and other things. So capturing some of that stuff in the design of the dials. And sometimes it can be unexpected places. It's not necessarily just because a person loves A, B, or C, but things they gravitate to them in their lives, whether it's obviously cars one, but, certain types of design. And so I try to kind of tap into that a little bit. It's almost like I tell people, I ask questions that a designer or especially a watchmaker might not normally ask. In terms of, it's almost like if you're a filmmaker, for example, you're going to drill deep into the concept of something, or if you're working on a documentary, you might ask some questions that go kind of like a level deeper than people might expect.
Yeah.
And it's all those textures that come together to kind of give you a full understanding of the story. And I'm kind of the same way. And I love, I love history. I love kind of finding out more about people, which is why I love doing events. So for me, it's kind of natural to kind of ask those kind of questions, to dig deeper. Like I said, it's all about creating an heirloom, right? So it's for me, there's no greater compliment than to think that someone's great grandchildren will have the same watch that I made for someone, because it really meant something to them. And as we know, when a lot of times when we buy watches, they can actually have a time and place associated with them too, or an event in our lives.
Yeah.
So for me, there's kind of an emotional aspect to it, with myself and with every customer that really I try to capture, which can be hard to quantify sometimes. You really have to kind of dig deep to figure it out.
There's somebody I heard, I don't remember who it was, but somebody said there's only one device in the world that tells you the future and the past at the same time. And it's a watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because obviously it keeps the time in the future, but also you can look down at your watch and say, I went to my honeymoon with this watch. I went to, to France and I dropped this watch and I lost it. And then somebody screamed at me, hey, you sure you dropped it? You know what I mean? Like you have these experiences.
You look at a little ding on your watch and it's like, oh, I totally remember.
Yeah.
I want to keep this here.
Yeah. Like I broke my finger when I made this ding or something. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And that's the coolest thing that I've ever thought about watches as literally like time capsules. Like they keep all those moments on the case, right?
Yeah. That's another interesting thing. And I've told this story before, but my father passed away a few years ago, and I inherited my grandfather's pocket watch from, I believe it's 1908. I might be wrong, but around that time. And I never knew that he had it. So my dad had kept it in his jewelry box for his whole life. And obviously he'd never gotten it cleaned or anything. So, popped it open. It doesn't run on time yet, but it's clean. It's beautiful. The interesting thing about that is I'd never met my grandfather. So he was born in the 1800s. And he died before I was born. So as to your point, it's like this pocket watch captures the past in a way. It's like this direct connection I have to my family, someone I never met. Yeah. And I think that's pretty powerful too when you think about the watches we're wearing on our wrist today. You hand those down. Hopefully someone takes care of them, and you just they end up telling a story. Like in the future. So it's almost like you're imprinted on the watch in a way, and we're just kind of caretakers along the watch's journey.
And my dad and probably your dad and I don't think my children or maybe but the first thing that people did when they woke up before cell phones was check the time. Hey, I woke up, had time to get the day going. Up is X 7:30 a.m. I need to be at work by 8, so that gives me that's the first thing that they would do. Check their watch, put their watch on, take it with them to the bathroom or whatever, and they would carry it with them because it was a necessity, right? And now it's not. It's the exact opposite of a necessity now. But to think about that and to reel that in is like with your grandpa's pocket watch. Like if you put that thing by your bed and the first thing you did when you woke up was check to see what time it was on your grandpa's pocket watch, you were doing the exact same thing he was doing with that exact same item.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's crazy.
And to your point about like the dings on watches and stuff too, it's like that's what I love about like when I'm still a watch collector, but like I started out vintage years ago, and that's the thing I liked about vintage is that you would see those dings. You'd see where you could tell if someone actually, by the back of the case, someone wore this watch every day, and I would love that kind of patina, that kind of history that shows that someone used it, as opposed to it being almost new old stock. So
50-year-old wrist cheese.
well, yeah, maybe cleaning that up first.
Yeah, you can tell. You can
Yeah,
tell.
but that's actually the unfortunate um, yeah.
Tell, let's walk our audience
Mhm.
through. You talked about the why and the how, but let's break it down a little more and
Mhm.
walk us through the creative process. You know,
Mhm.
how do you tailor the watch to the owner? I mean, obviously, you
Yeah.
said that they have some ideas, but I come to you and I want to watch.
Yep. What are
Let's
the
go from
first
there.
steps?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, sometimes I start with, I can tell pretty quickly if someone's kind of concept driven or, they're a watch lover and they, obviously kind of like certain things, gravitate to certain things that might start the conversation. But sometimes I start with format. So, for example, I have several case options. My most popular one, which I released a couple of years ago, is my 38 millimeter kind of tonneau shape case,
It's a
which
beautiful case,
oh, thank you.
by the
Yeah,
way. Yeah, yeah.
it's I love it. I mean, it's something that I spent actually more than a year just getting
It's
the
beautiful.
curve the curve just right. So I kept curving lugs, curving lugs, curving lugs. It's kind of this balance, as most of my watches are kind of like this balance of tool watch and dress watch. Meaning, personally, I love blurring the lines between the two. Um, I believe that everyone should kind of wear a watch and not have to worry about it, but there is a certain kind of specialness to it. And depending on the dial selection and the handsets and the straps or bracelet, some of my watches can look very kind of field like or tool like, but then they can also easily look more dressy. Um, so my cases are kind of designed like that. The 38 millimeter is my most popular format, but I also have mid-size, um, and I have even larger watches, ones I don't make as much anymore, but larger hand-wound movement, that kind of go from my original Flieger origins years ago. So I might get a handful of those that I create a year, in that size. But sometimes I'll start there in terms of kind of what feels right on the wrist, what format. Um, and then I'm going to be releasing actually very soon another kind of 36 millimeter watch. It's kind of a little bit more of a field watch kind of profile, as well as a 39 millimeter. So I think my core collection really is that kind of 36 to 39 millimeter. Um, and then within that, my dials, since I have this kind of flexibility and I do all the production of my dials in house, that's where kind of the fun continues. So, if someone, for example, determines like, yeah, I think I'd like a, mid-size, just feels nice and compact on my wrist. Yeah, I want a, leather strap. So it might start, that might be the original kind of start of it. And then we go from there into the concept of the dial. Um, and then I'll show them kind of a lot of stuff I'm working on. And I literally have, you know, book of patina recipes that I keep track of. I use different metals such as brass, copper, sterling silver, zinc, gold alloy. Um, most common ones are brass, copper, and zinc, which kind of give you very different effects, obviously. So I love copper and a lot of the warm metals. So someone, for example, might say, "I'd love to have something that's like transitional, dressy, but also a little tool-like, but they kind of gravitate to warm colors." Then a lot of it is me actually coming up with something that they didn't expect. Saying, "Hey, I can do a patinated copper dial, for example, that's engraved." So it kind of gives you this really cool gilt effect on the dial. But then we could also do kind of a lacquer finish. So you have this kind of high contrast dial, but with copper elements in it, that kind of thing. And then I can even do, say custom painted hands with it. So it's a little bit different combination. So it's kind of like putting together a puzzle or building a little house. Sometimes they start with the overall format, which is the case. Other times people might start with a dial first,
Yeah.
saying, I haven't quite decided which size I want, but it kind of doesn't matter because I've engineered it so that I can really make the dial for any of those sizes, which kind of, it's kind of an exciting thing. Just like a lot of watch collectors, usually the first thing, if I buy a watch, I usually don't like the strap. I want to replace it.
Hate it.
Or there's something you always want to change about a watch. It's like, oh, I wish I could remove this one thing, or I could swap out something. So that was part of it when I first started, was giving people that power to kind of start to think about their watch in a different way. So I find that, people get really excited if they can just change a couple of things. They might see what I'm working on, say, hey, I love that, that kind of modern Roman dial, but wow, you could actually do that in copper, and then we could use a different handset. And then I source all the leather so that it's all very kind of special leather, even stuff that you can't find twice. So, even that kind of thing, people really geek out quickly in terms of thinking about options. So I would say more often than not, it's about me kind of guiding them and helping limit options, as opposed to, I want to actually narrow the funnel versus broaden
Like wheel them in, like, hey, come on, let's do this.
Yeah, just because people do get overwhelmed, and I totally get that.
Yeah.
So it's something that I want to make sure that I can help guide them and come up with some options. And a lot of times, people end up with something they didn't expect to. They actually end up a very different end product than they expected to have, simply because they're allowing themselves to kind of experiment and consider different things. And also, I should add, and one big part of it is I have a watch builder on my website that I launched a few years ago. That is a huge help, because I don't put every dial option in there, but again, not to overwhelm people, but as I'm doing batches of dials and new designs, I'll put some of them in the watch builder, and then every few weeks it changes. So it's always being refreshed. But I find that often people have already played in the watch builder and selected a case and a dial and a handset and a strap. And it totally gives you an accurate visualization of what it is. And so they already have kind of an idea, like they'll literally have like little cheat sheets where they've played around with it. So I found that that's extremely helpful too. Just kind of putting a little bit of power in their hands, but letting them also know that, I'm kind of the chef, so I can help direct them, and I can be a part of that process to help direct them with all the decisions. So
Yeah, I actually, ironically, I have the watch builder up here and one of my other tabs, and so
there you go. Yeah.
I was having a little fun with it. So at some point, I will own one of your watches. I promise.
Yeah, you can kick the tires.
Yeah. So obviously, something that most people don't understand is obviously you're working with materials, right? Like the watch supply chain is probably one of the most complex supply chains in the world.
Absolutely.
Like, arguably, right? So beyond materials and sourcing, what are some of the challenges that you have kind of realized that exist in watchmaking? And conversely, like, what are the ways that you get past that, and what are the most rewarding aspects?
I think that's actually really interesting, and it's something I've thought a lot about. I could probably answer that with like a single answer. So
Do it.
The first few years of me starting this journey, as we know, like it was good timing in terms of certain parts were available, so for those who wanted to mod watches or tinker, we're very lucky in the last 20 years that that's become a thing, right? So there is a certain accessibility that has increased, which is great. Yet at the same time, there's this kind of push-pull process of the supply chain. ETA movements becoming hard to get.
Yeah.
And as you probably noticed, most of my watches are ETA movements. So
You're not doing yourself any favors.
Yeah, 2824 is my kind of workhorse movement that I use in most of the watches I make. So what's interesting about that is the first, probably 6 or 7 years, I was actually acquiring parts. I don't know, kind of I don't want to say hoarding because that sounds dirty, but
it doesn't, not at all.
I was collecting. I was
okay.
I tell my wife I'm a collector, not a hoarder. Literally there were parts that I was acquiring over years that at the time you couldn't really foresee some of the supply chain difficulties. But as I was getting busier and I was trying different things, obviously that required some equipment and parts. So I was lucky enough to get like a lot of ETA movements, for example, a lot of parts for them. And what I found is that I kind of got to the sweet spot a few years ago where I would spend so much time on production, say 5 or 6 years ago. A lot of my time was spent doing assembly, getting some more parts to fulfill orders, trying to plan ahead, whether it was manufacturing some parts or making stuff myself or acquiring it and finding a supplier or contact a supplier I had and trying to figure out if they have enough. Um, but then I got to a point where I had enough of my internal supply in house that in conjunction with my processes becoming more streamlined, I've kind of flip-flopped in a great way where instead of spending 80% of my time doing kind of busy work and production work, now I find that, 80% of my time is planning ahead. It's creative development. It's prototyping, FaceTime with people, it's like, which is great. So, and a big part of that was kind of and I just got lucky that, kind of the supply chain part of it, having parts in house that I could be a little bit more self-sufficient is huge. I still have to, like my cases, for example, those are something that I do in batches. So I tend to do about 300 cases in a run. That takes time. This 38 millimeter case that is my most popular one now, I actually started that process pre-COVID. And it wasn't actually because of COVID that I actually spent a lot longer during development cycle because I was changing the profile and I was re-prototyping things. But that really was about a 2.5-year project for that run of cases. So there's certain things, and that's something that people don't necessarily realize. It takes a long time for certain kind of parts to make them, to produce, and to be ready. Lucky the doll part of it is something that can iterate, which is kind of makes me a little bit of an odd duck in the micro brand space because I'm the one touching everything, assembling everything, and making the dials. But it gives me a lot of flexibility. But I think the ongoing challenges, which we all face as small brands, are the capabilities of some manufacturing. And I know you had this discussion with other brands. Vortic, obviously, I'm good friends with him, and it's like we had that conversation too. Like, he's one of the rare folks that is kind of creating an infrastructure around manufacturing, which I think is huge. So I think as time goes on, it's going to be really, really, really interesting for all of the brands that we kind of lift each other up. So I think if we become more unified, which I know in the UK that's been great what they've been doing. I think as we all become more unified, I think it gives us a certain power, whether it's to go to particular factories to produce things that they haven't produced yet, or creating obviously our own domestic kind of manufacturing capabilities. I think especially stuff like cases, sapphire crystals. There is some movement on the movements, in Arizona and stuff like. So there's stuff happening, which I think is very exciting. But I think those are the challenges that I have, which everyone has, is that there's certain components that just require a lot of time and expense, and thinking ahead. So if I'm releasing a new case, that is not something that takes weeks or months, but usually takes years to plan ahead for that. And obviously investment. And for me, I'm kind of being a small brand, basically a one-man brand. That's something I take very seriously as well. I've had other businesses in the past in terms of design firm, but services organization is very different, obviously, from a product company. But when I first approached it, I was kind of just naive. So I told myself I'm never going to, I'm never going to borrow money, and B, I'm never going to be in debt, hopefully, and then C, and C, I always want to be profitable, but in a fair, responsible way.
Yeah.
So I like to keep my prices accessible, but knock on wood, I'm totally bootstrapped, and that's kind of how I approach my development. So I don't pursue doing a new case or whatever it is I'm investing in until I know that that's the proper thing to do, that I can meet the desired price point, offer value to the end buyer, and also obviously, you know, that it works for my finances to actually invest in A, B, or C, you know, whatever that part is. But you know, your original question there is like, I think the challenge is it's something that we all face, a kind of similar supply chain challenges, and just shortages too. You know, sometimes they're just things that we're talking about a niche within a niche, right? In terms of watches. So if you're looking for a particular kind of screw or part, even though it might be a fairly common thing within watchmaking itself, you're dealing in it within a bubble in a bubble. So it might not be readily available. So I think, you know, moving forward, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, not just domestically, but even globally with all sorts of brands in terms of our relationship, meaning independent and micro brands to the kind of mid-tier, larger brands. I think could be interesting relationships that form, as well as just our kind of network of you know, independent brands. So I think, you know, to me, it's kind of an exciting time that I think there'll be a lot of change in the next 5 years. Is just my rough prediction, but I feel like it's exciting to even see brands that haven't been around that long, how much they've been able to do really quickly.
So I'm a huge fan of Back to the Future. It's one of my favorite movies. Like, and
Absolutely.
Doc Brown is one of my favorite characters.
Mhm.
The only reason why I'm saying this is because I'm curious what your flux capacitor moment was for Bespoke. Like, you know, you hit your head, boom, came up with a flux capacitor. There had to have been a watch that you were working on in your studio for a customer, and you're like, oh shit, like I didn't expect to do this, and I didn't expect for this to happen, but this is insane and this is beautiful, and now I'm gonna share it with the world.
You know what? There kind of is a flux capacitor moment. Yeah, it's interesting. I've never thought of it in that context, but yeah, I love Back to the Future too.
Yeah, you got to.
I'm a kid of the '80s too. I love it. Yeah, I think really it wasn't necessarily a client commission, but when I started really allowing myself to do weird stuff, for lack of a better term, you know, as we all know, I think collectors now, we all gravitate to things that are different, and it's really refreshing to see that in the watch space where, you know what, people doing weird stuff, and it's like people love it. You know, people are into it. They want something different, offbeat. You know, we've seen a lot of interesting releases lately that have, God, sold like gangbusters, because they were so different from anything else before. So I think for me, going from even doing pretty experimental dial designs and kind of, you know, graphically different treatments is one thing, but about, I guess, a couple of years ago, doing dials that were really more about surface texture and not as much of a hard edge design, but allowing myself to kind of think a little bit more freeform about it, and kind of get messy and to kind of just try stuff. That was pretty cool. You know, like I did a series of dials, which I'm still doing, that are, you know, layers of enamel and metallic pigment, in which basically I call them, they start out, and this is French, modèle nu, which is like kind of nude model. So I had my modèle nu, which was a series of dials that don't have markers on them, that are really more about celebrating the material and the treatment of the material, like, you know, very minimal watch tech, you know, kind of design. And then from there, it kind of evolved into this thing. As I was playing around with materials, I was doing layers of metallic pigment, and then when I'm doing a radial finishing on them, radial brushing. So it's kind of start to change the nature of the material, as well as remove it a bit, so that you actually end up with like this tremendous amount of depth in the dial. And I was doing, you know, different colors, different treatments, and it was totally just an experiment, you know. And my original intention was to create another color, another kind of technique, surface technique, that I can engrave with designs. But I found that I didn't want to violate the dial treatment with markers. Like it totally changed the look of it. So I think my flux capacitor moment was when I kind of gave myself permission to just try stuff, and I said, you know what, I really don't care if anyone buys it or not. You know, when I gave myself just that license to say, you know what, I like it. It's kind of cool. It's kind of weird. You know, and of course I have my drawer of failed experiments too. But, you know, when I started like playing with that, and you know what, I'm just treating it almost like a piece of art or painting, which someone out there will probably appreciate it. Maybe it's one person, maybe it's just me, but that's okay. And I found that when I actually, it was actually a wind up a couple of years ago, I put some of the pieces out, and I had some of these dials, and one of them was really gnarly looking. And when I literally gnarly, like it was, what it was brass dial that I did finishing on it. I did patinas, and then I actually did a sterling silver plating on top of it. So it ended up with this like very modeled appearance. Like from a distance, it looked almost like a map, but looking closer, you realize it's just kind of like this crazy textured dial. And I put it out there, almost as a conversation piece. I thought, what, people probably, if anything, people might like think this is really weird and ask me about it. It was actually the first watch that I sold at the event.
Wow, damn.
So it kind of showed me, and of course, validation's great, but it kind of showed me that, again, it's kind of going with your gut and experimenting a bit and being a little bit freeform, that even as watch collectors, that we all look for something that's a little bit unique and different. And, beauty can be in a lot of different ways, can reflect itself in a lot of different ways. So I think going that route, where I actually have this part of my collection that is very more experimental, and a little bit more of kind of a dial as art approach, if you will, I found it has been very popular. Whether someone actually, someone might still gravitate to a practical watch, for example, but I found that people really appreciate it, and that it's actually fueled a lot of my other commissions in terms of trying some different stuff, simply because I allowed myself to kind of off-road a bit. So I started with the flux capacitor. Now I have the version that has the garbage that you can put in, and it's like it's like the version 3.0, of the flux.
Yeah. I can't think of the name of it.
It was like Garbamagib. I don't know. It was like some
Omatic. Yeah. It was pretty bad. It's like pouring a little soda in there.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
Something that obviously we talked about earlier in the podcast. We talked about film, and we talked about being able to edit a film and create endless amounts of stories and films and narratives or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But your goal is to offer accessible heirlooms for watch collectors. But how do you balance, because these things typically don't go together in the same sense, like, quality, uniqueness, while still being grounded by affordability. Like how does that even work?
Yeah, and it goes back to kind of what we discussed earlier about luxury. I think my viewpoint on luxury, and even kind of my evolving viewpoint over the years for luxury, is that it doesn't necessarily need to be unattainable or expensive to the point of being unattainable. But it's a fine balance. So, for example, most of my watches are in that. Most are in that kind of 800 to 1200 range. Some of them are more, if I have some kind of custom projects, a little bit more than that. But I would say that's my core sweet spot. And, in the future, there will be different tiers of products with the intention of doing exactly that, in terms of like, okay, if someone wants a certain kind of bespoke approach to a made to order watch, here's one option, but, there might be a tier 3 that you get certain materials, certain treatments, certain kind of more laborious processes that obviously warrant that price. But I think the balance it's something I'm always doing, is kind of keeping an eye on that. And I don't want people ever to think that there's an artificial inflation with prices, which I think is hard for watch brands. It's something that we all complain about with big watch brands. When you look at what's under the hood and you look at how things are finished, it's like, oh, why are they asking this price? On the flip side of that, I'll just go out there and say that, and I own a lot of micro brands too. The people that I personally know and respect, there are a lot of micro brands out there. There's tremendous value, and to the point where I feel like some are underpriced for kind of knowing the care, design, finishing, everything that they put into the watches. So I think there's a sweet spot, and I think with every brand, it's different. For me, because I touch every piece of the watch, And the dials are kind of this essentially made to order thing, or at least, very unique thing. Um, I'm constantly assessing. It's like, okay, if I'm putting X number of hours into creating this kind of dial, for example, should that be the same price as this other dial?
Right.
Or, but I also have to look at it from a consumer standpoint. Is I don't want to confuse people. I want to make it intuitive in terms of, I don't want pricing to be so complicated that someone's head spins, or they, just because they made one little choice, they're like, why is this so much more? I don't want that to happen either. So for me, it is a challenge, probably more so than maybe other brands, because of the nature of how I kind of make the watches.
The
Uh,
limitations. You're one man.
yeah. So for me, I basically say, I want people to realize the value they're getting, and if anything, I want them to think about, okay, why doesn't this cost more? Which I have some people ask that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm very transparent about how I make things. So I'm using, workhorse movement 2824, modify it, regulate it myself. I'm even doing some kind of treatments to the bridges and stuff now, kind of like
I know you're
that kind of
regulating.
stuff. So obviously that could be kind of a tier eventually, some more finishing and different stuff for the movements, as well as other movements I can source. But I'm constantly kind of assessing the work that's involved, and that's the hardest thing, because you put X number of hours into doing editing, right? So I'm sure you realize at certain points, like, okay, if I were paying myself for my time, like, what would it be worth? So there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that we all put into our art forms, and that's something that I just kind of accepted early on, that's really what I want to put in. I want to make sure I'm passing along value. But like you said, there's a fine line in kind of that heirloom concept, luxury concept. So it's a balance. And, I think that me packaging it in an intuitive way so that people realize kind of what they can get. Like if they have a certain budget, for example, they're looking for a certain kind of watch, that it's something that's not too complicated or hidden or a surprise. But at the same time, I want to make sure that I'm actually being transparent about, hey, I'm using this kind of material. It has this kind of labor that puts into it. It's assembled by me, which some people might not realize. All that kind of stuff is a very different kind of watch than if it's a watch that's just unpacked from the factory, or
Right.
obviously a big box retailer, or or something that is a not a very limited model. So it's a little bit of a tango, I think, in terms of just communicating to the consumer, what they're getting, and kind of how I want to provide value to.
As a product designer, um, I think your goal is to impact people in their lives by your designs, right?
Hmm.
That's probably, I mean, I'm sure that's like a number one checklist for any product designer.
Yeah.
Um, and for me as a filmmaker, my goal is to tell a story, right?
Hmm.
And if I can compact that story, if I could take an hour story and compact it into 3 minutes, then I am like a mad scientist,
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
way. Um, but the only reason why I'm bringing this up is because I had just worked on a project for a partner here, and they had given me some watches to do some reviews with, and
Hmm.
it was super cool watch brand. I already told you about them, but Mula. Um,
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
and anyways, it was a brand I'd never really like even had on my radar, and I took them home. I just fell in love with them, and that happens unfortunately a lot for
Hmm.
what I do. but
It's
but
something we're all
anyways,
subject to these days. Yeah.
it's a hard one to talk about. But anyways, somehow, some way, we had like a little TV there, and they were like, "Oh, let's airplay it for the rest of our staff to see what you came." I was like, "Okay, like you are legit screening my work in front of your entire staff right now."
No stress.
I know, right? And then these were like not even finished videos. Like I had gaps that I had came there to drop a few things off, to drop the watches off. I brought my camera to shoot some additional B-roll, and then there we were screening my my work, and then the owner goes, "How long did that take you to do?" And I'm like, "What?" Like I've never had anybody ask me that question, you know. And then I told her, And then she goes, holy shit, like it took you that long?
Yeah.
And then she goes back to her staff, like her staff had walked away at the point, right? And she goes, how long do you think that took Blake to make? And and then this guy was like, oh yeah, like you, like way under, like, you know, like insultingly low number, you know? And and then she's like, no, that took him 8 hours to edit, you know? And then he goes, holy shit, like what the, you know? So the reason why I'm telling you this story is I know you probably know exactly where I'm going right now. So
Yeah.
your watches, people get their watches, they see your watch, like, oh, this is cool, boom, let me buy it, whatever. But people really have no idea the amount of time, labor, energy, effort, sleepless nights. You know, they watch my 3 minute video and they think it took me 3 minutes to make it, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
Or in your case, you know, thankfully you don't have the issue that a lot of other brands, it's just like, oh, this watch is cool. It probably comes straight from China, you know? Like,
Yeah.
doesn't happen for you. But I'm sure there's something that you do in your development, you know, if it's probably the case or the finishing or the dial finishing, where you people have no idea how much time that takes you to
Mm-hmm.
get that effect. So kind of
Or the
like your yeah, kind of like your flux capacitor moment. What is your this is my black hole moment, right?
yeah.
We're using a lot of moments like where you could
Yeah.
say I could spend 20 hours doing a perlage effect on a dial and nobody has no idea, but then I charged my $200 for that dial, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna use in the review.
yeah. I
Watch.
mean, so it's funny, you know, those black holes, and I think I totally relate to your story about the filmmaking, because in, you know, different kind of designs I've done, it's like people can be surprised how long the creative process takes, um, whether it's something production related or just creative related, right? Or just almost like just how long it takes you to get to figure out how to tell a story, to get your ideas together, you know, have your notes together, all that kind of stuff. People usually have no idea how long it takes. Um, and while yes, some of the hands-on stuff can take long too, sometimes you surprise yourself at how quick it can be. You know, like, you know,
Definitely.
like some, you know, fine artists might say, oh, they spend weeks coming up with an idea for a painting, but then they actually painted it in 5 hours. You know, so it's
Yeah.
I think it's like that in a weird way with watches, because there have been times where I would expect to spend a long time, say, okay, I'm going to assemble 5 watches this week or whatever it might be. You know, I'm going to do a batch of these, do assembly this week. I'm going to do some dials next week. I'm doing prototyping another week. I can be actually surprised at how quickly some things come together. But then, like you said, the black hole is, I'm going to sit down and work on this one dial. And it's like 2 days later, yeah, my wife has to pull me out of that rabbit hole. She's like, you know,
My
spending
wife does
way
that.
too much time in there. You know, so that happens a lot. I mean, whether it's like working on a physical treatment of something, like literally being in the dirty side of my studio working on a dial. But on the flip side of that, you know, just some of the planning stuff can take a long time. Like I'm actually working on a batch of watches right now, and that's another side of my business is I'll actually do custom pieces. Like I'm doing a run of 25 watches that are designed for this group, and so I'm kind of working collaboratively with them. It's a really cool project, but I'm spending a lot of time on the design process, a lot of time on the literally have a spreadsheet where I'm looking at, okay, I need this component. You know, what do I need to get in the next couple of weeks? When do I start assembling this batch? You know, it's almost like that unsexy stuff that
Yeah.
as creatives, we can spend a lot of time on that. So I think to me, that's become more of the black holes, I think, are some of that planning stuff, or even going back to my case design, where it took me probably twice the time that I originally thought, because I literally was spending it on changing the profile of the case. And I changed it 3 times before, you know, during the prototyping stage. Um, that creative process, which a lot of micro brands go through, I think that can be a huge time sucker. But yeah, I think probably the unique thing for me is doing that dial finishing or experimenting with a different finish. And again, I
Yeah.
have my drawer failed projects too. So I might have like, oh, I can totally nail it. I love this thing I'm working on, and then realize, no, I gotta pull this back and kind of pull it back in the shop and tweak it a bit more. So there's that kind of trial and error that you go through with physical production. So I think for me it's it probably is the dials and the planning, which are it can be humbling sometimes when you know that you've got to do certain things in a couple weeks and you're kind of under the wire. Like there's creative stuff that you want to get through as well. So
Yeah. Do you ever find yourself? Because I mean, obviously, I know the artist type. I know a lot of friends. I went to film school, and so
Mhm,
I come from associating myself with artists.
mhm.
But artists are generally pretty selfish people,
Hmm.
and so you might know where I'm going with this. But um, has there ever been like something where you designed it and it was just so important to you that you're just like, I don't know if I should share this, you know?
Hmm.
And that could be, a not really a form of selfishness, but just
Personal expression.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I think actually goes in line with the what I said earlier is the kind of dials, the experimental dials I was working on. I think that was something that's like, hey, this is kind of weird. Like, and honestly, I think when I accepted the fact, it's gone through it's like acceptance. It's gone through different stages over the years in my business where, um, I'm pretty honest with people. I tell them, you know what, I'm making my own donuts. So if I don't sell any donuts, I'll eat them all. you know,
yeah,
I'll
exactly.
just
Yeah,
I'll be in a desert island. I'll enjoy the watches. Um, so that's a nice way of saying that making stuff that I care about, and even if someone doesn't buy it, then it's still worth making.
yeah,
Um,
of course.
which is kind of a weird, for something for being a a brand that's selling something. It's kind of a weird thought process, but I think once I got to that realization a few years ago, it maybe kind of opened me up a little bit in terms of what I allowed myself to produce.
Yeah,
That I do have the flexibility to try stuff, and which obviously a big watch brand can't do that.
right.
If they're going to do like a brown dial, they better damn well make sure that someone's going to buy a brown.
Hundreds at one time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and it's even then it's a risk. There are a lot of
yeah,
stuff that
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that watches or brands are creating that they know that might not sell, but it's worth it for a particular reason. So I think is when I give myself the license to kind of just try stuff, especially like with those dials, for example, then it kind of loosened me up where I'm like, you know what? Maybe it's too weird, but that's okay. Um, and a lot of what I do is collaborative too, like with client stuff, and it kind of I think loosened me up a little bit to go through that creative process with clients, so that we could kind of take a journey together. Which I'm kind of comes. It's kind of natural to me given my background, kind of how I work with people. That's what you do in traditional design, obviously, that kind of
Yeah.
collaborative experience. But I think it may be a little looser. It's like when I kind of accepted the fact, you know what, we could try something weird if we want to. So literally the guy with the car, like I've done several of those now, where it's like, you know what, how about we use your automotive paint? You know, so I've done that several times where it's like actually source the automotive paint and use it on the dial and try something very different. Um, just kind of trying to color outside the lines a bit in terms of process, which I think is really rewarding and it's rewarding for me, but it's obviously rewarding for every customer and client. But yeah, to your point, I think kind of that art background, there might be a little selfishness or maybe just personal expression part of it that you
Yeah.
always
It's like, hey, this
you
is
always
too personal for me. That
and you as a filmmaker, right? I mean, that same thing. There's a part of that you hang on to, like you tell a story a certain way, you like to use b-roll in a certain way, or there's certain things you like to capture, certain vignettes you like to capture in a certain way. That's your DNA. Like it's what
yeah.
you have to, that's a part of you that you have to hang on to and express. And I think that
It,
every art's that way, I think.
it happened to me like particularly. I was in. I don't know. I don't remember where I was in. I was in like some European. I think I was in Serbia,
Hmm.
but I took my drone and I like was flying my drone all across Belgrade, and there's this one church, Saint Sava. That's the name of it. And I flew my drone at Saint Sava,
Hmm.
probably super illegal. I don't even know, but in the middle of the night,
Right.
right? And so, of course, you can see the glow from the church, and then as I got higher in altitude, I was like, dude, you could just see the strings of lights through the city, and I was just like, I at the time I was selling stock footage. I was putting
Hmm.
videos up, like aerials up on stock websites. People were buying them and using them for whatever, right? And I was like, this is what I'm never gonna sell
Hmm.
because this is the
Yeah.
only. I just want to use this in my video,
Hmm.
and I ended up using it. Um, but this is one I'm never gonna let somebody gain access to.
Mm. Yeah. Because
And
it
so,
resonated with you. Yeah.
yeah, it's like this was just the I don't know. It was just like a very special, like full circle moment for me.
I have that a
Um,
little bit with pieces. Like I've, full disclosure, I've had a few watches I've made lately with the intent of having read, for a show or something.
didn't sell
And
them,
I
huh?
was like, I can't let it go. I
Yeah,
mean, they're all my children in a way, but
yeah,
or there'll be a piece that I put out there and it's like, oh, I hope no one buys it. So
yeah,
kind of a funny feeling. I mean, it's kind of like your footage, right?
yeah,
There's something that resonates, and you realize that even though you might make another one similar, it's not going to be the same. And so,
yeah, yeah. You know the
yeah,
backstory, right? Like the case ding moments of that walk.
yeah,
We talked about the case ding, right? Like
yeah.
and the moments that nobody else is gonna know, and you're like, oh man, this is so special.
Like you
Um,
sitting at night doing that drone footage, or me making that dial.
exactly.
That's you remember that part of it.
Yeah, yeah. You remember how you got to that place.
Yeah.
Um, so I have two more questions,
Hmm.
and we'll wrap.
Absolutely.
Um, so which we just talked about having products and stuff that resonate with you, but which product is it that you produce that is your personality in a wrist form,
Ooh.
like that this encapsulates everything I
Yeah.
wanted bespoke watch projects to be. This is me, this is my purest form of expression, and if I was a human turned into a watch, I would be this watch.
Oof. Yeah. That's a hard question.
We ask
Uh,
hard questions here,
yeah.
man. You should have listened to some of my other podcasts. You probably would have never showed up.
I know. Yeah. That's a hard one. Yeah. It's funny because even though I'm a designer and I try to eat my own dog food, or over the years I tell clients, you got to always edit down, be selective. I remember I had a professor in school that said, you're as strong as your weakest portfolio piece.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I try to live through all that, but it's hard because literally it's hard for me to narrow down. Even like if I have to select 10 watches I want to show someone, it's extremely hard because there's so much variation. Um, I do have to say, I kind of have to, um, my best answer for that, I think, would be looking at my pieces and even my collecting background. And it's like, you know, some of the things I've really liked that aren't my watches. I mean, I think there's some historical aspect I think I have for horology, like kind of appreciation. So I love sector dials. Um, so if I had a short list, I would probably have to say my sector dials I really love. Obviously by nature of how I engrave and create my dials, they're all kind of gilt dials to a certain degree. Um, so I think that aspect, kind of that metallic aspect, really resonates with me. So I love copper. I love a lot of the warmer metals lately. Um, so I'd probably have to say maybe like a steely gray patina with copper, but then in a sector dial form, to me is a kind of a no brainer. Um, but then there's also kind of a little bit of a offbeat sensibility I have. So some of my dials that are a little bit more graphic, like there's one called the mono bonder, which is kind of a little bit of a Bauhausian dial, but with some concentric circles that I use graphically. So almost like a bullseye dial, but not quite. Um, so I think there's a little bit of that too, that kind of pulls a little bit from heritage stuff, from existing horology, but with kind of a twist. So I think there's kind of, those are the two sides to me that I would say, if I kind of boil it down to two or three things, um, I would say that kind of captures my personality.
Amazing.
But that's a hard question to answer.
Uh,
'Cause I'll change
unrelate.
mine in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I should have prefaced with like, what is the one that you would be now? like today, this
Yeah,
moment, instead of
right
like
now.
tomorrow or the day after. Um,
Hmm.
but anyways, I'll let you die on that hill.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But no, something unrelated
Hmm.
is as I was going through and I was poking around,
Uh-oh.
and
Uh-oh. What did I do?
no, it's actually something you need to implement
Oh, okay.
constructively.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think I don't remember where I saw this, but there was like I don't know. It was a website where you could go and you could make something customized. What had
Hmm.
like a builder, right?
Yeah.
And there was a randomizer.
Ooh.
Something I just noticed as I was going through and I was
Oh.
building my own bespoke watch
Or
project.
like an AI engine or something that could
Yeah, it just like it just throws something together because like
the
I was going.
gonculator.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the flux capacitor.
Yeah.
Like where you just press a button and it just randomizes the design.
Mhm.
Because I was like literally flipping through the cases and I was flipping through the dials and I was flipping through the hands. And as I was going through the hands and the dials, I just realized like every combination looks amazing.
Hmm.
Like you can't go wrong. Like I know this seems really weird, but like for example, there was like I had the green. What dial is this? The green Super 60 ombre zinc,
Hmm. Hmm.
and then I threw gold hands on it, like the gold arrow hands.
Which actually kind of shouldn't work, but they work kind of in a way. Yeah.
It's and then I have a green second hand,
Hmm.
and I'm like, this on paper does not work, but everybody, I promise you, if you were seeing what I see, it works. So
That's interesting. Yeah, actually, I love your idea of the randomizer.
randomizer.
That's a great idea. But and I appreciate that's a compliment. I appreciate the no wrong choice comment. But it's funny because I try to be aware of that when I'm putting, say, more dials in there. But it's really interesting because I've found that I've been surprised. So it's you know putting together watch combos is kind of like an outfit, and there's certain things that just shouldn't go together, but they end up working.
Yeah.
I actually have some orders where people will choose random stuff that I've never actually tried together, and I'll literally be sitting at my bench assembling it. I was like, damn, that actually fucking works.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, it's kind of amazing that, and again, part of it's seeing in the metal too, right? So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
see a
Yeah.
tone of something, and like, yeah, even though this is green and that's green, it somehow works. So
Yeah.
I kind of think that's actually kind of a really exciting thing, and so,
Yeah. It
um,
is. It's amazing.
but
It's fun.
I'm sure one of these days there'll be something really bad that comes out, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm not shipping this.
Well, yeah,
Like,
it's
um,
when you take your gold Tonu case and then you slap it on a steel bracelet, we could draw the line
yeah,
there
yeah,
at yeah. Hey, are you sure you
like
want me to
doing
ship this?
two tone in a bad way. Yeah,
Yeah. So if you do a randomizer, don't let it randomize steel and gold
yeah.
or
Yeah,
these two different color metals.
there'll have to be some if then statements to make sure
Yeah,
that.
yeah. There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so we talked about this before the record,
Hmm.
before we press record. Um,
Hmm.
tell us what is in the pipeline. Is there any upcoming projects, collaborations, like anything that you're excited to share? Spill the tea, and then we will leave you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm as comes no surprise after this conversation, I'm continuing some experiments with dial treatments. So folks will see that, especially at some of the upcoming events that I'm doing. I tend to do wind up San Francisco because it's literally right here, 20 minutes from my studio. And I also do wind up New York City. Um, I love Chicago, but I'm usually busy that time of summer. So
Right.
I tend to do the SF wind up, New York wind up, and then I also did District Time in DC, um, Intersect, which I recently did in Atlanta. So I do several events throughout the year. And the great thing about that is I make sure that I'm kind of working ahead for that. So I'm going to be releasing some new dial treatments that people haven't seen before, as well as I'm launching a couple of new case options, 36 millimeter case and a 39 millimeter case. So those are actually coming out very soon. So people will see those in the watch builder. They'll see it on my website as I roll it out. And yeah, there'll also be some kind of under the, I don't want to say under the radar, but in the club kind of stuff. So people go to sign up on my website. I'll be sharing access to some of that stuff before the big release. And as I'm actually assembling some watches with my new dials and cases for some of the upcoming shows, I'll make those available to kind of my peeps. And then it's not unusual for me to have stuff at shows that those pieces will be one of a kind and they're not available on my website. So, that's all kind of fun to work on, but that's kind of on the case side and on the dial side. I'm going to be releasing some new stuff. And then, then I think there's some potential collaborations I'm working on coming up probably early next year. So it's
amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's, as we know, it's like we get up every morning, all of us in the creative fields, and it's like, there's always a new opportunity. So, and I think in the watch space, I mean, so many people are doing cool stuff, and you see a lot of micro brands collaborating too, which I think is really exciting. So it's ever evolving.
So if I heard you right, you're going to be collaborating with some micro brands. Did I?
Oh, no, I didn't say that per se.
No. I assume that you didn't say that, but I put two and two together.
There's been a lot of discussions around that, not just with me, but just in general.
Yeah.
But I do have some kind of creative collaborations that I've been talking about that might come to fruition next year. But in the meantime, I'll be kind of doing my thing and releasing a lot of new treatments and of dials and cases that people haven't seen yet. And that's usually one of the first questions when people see me at an event is like, oh, is there a different case I can use, or that kind of thing? So especially offering kind of the different finishes, I think is huge for people to kind of have more options to choose from. So
yeah. Well, thank you so much, John. We have took an hour and 20 minutes. We have a feature length film here.
We do. We just need popcorn.
Yeah. I'm sure there's some. My wife loves that really like sweet popcorn. It's like, I don't even know what it is. But it's
kettle corn.
Yeah, it's something different. I don't know. It's like very sweet. Maybe, I don't know.
Caramel.
Yeah, it could be. I don't know, but it's like you get into. It's not something you buy. It's not something you make. It's something you buy. And
nothing wrong with sweet and nothing wrong. With so
no. So again, thank you so much for coming on. I am so glad to have you.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I hope. Hope to see you again soon.
I will see you at Wind Up. I will find you, and then if you're not too, I'm not sure which days I'm going to be going.
Mm-hmm.
I already have my flights. I already have my hotels. I got everything booked. I'm not quite sure. I'll definitely be there one of the days, and then I was thinking about getting together some of the brands to do like kind of like a lonely wrist dinner with like.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Like maybe like 10 or so of like the brands that we've worked with, or however many. I know a few of them have already reached out and said, hey, let's do dinner.
Yeah.
But with my limited time, I can only do dinner. So many dinners. I can't do 10 dinners in 3 days,
Yeah.
So I might see if I can organize
I think a lot of the folks you've had recently, I know, I think the Bravo guys are going to be here.
Yeah, they are. Yep.
Yeah. So a lot of guys you had recently, I think a lot of them are going to be here. Abington, I think, might be coming too.
So the ones that I've specifically talked to is Ferlin Mari. He came on. We just had Jose from Isotope. He and I are in regular discussion, and then I mean, some of the guys, like I'm driving Peter's watch right now.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And so I mean, I guess we'll see. But yeah.
I think it's, it's going to be we're destined to have drinks at some point.
Yeah.
whether it's a large group or small group.
Yeah. And so obviously we'll figure that out as time comes a little closer. But
absolutely.
But yeah, thank you so much again for coming on. And everybody, we will link John's Bespoke watch projects in the description of this podcast, and you should definitely check him out. Go to his website, build a watch, and see what I'm talking about. You will have something special in your parcel. In your parcel?
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm talking about. What am I talking about?
Postage parcel.
John will post it to you, and it will be special from there on.
I'll slap it on your wrist.
Yeah. He will fly in and help you attach the watch to your wrist.
Yeah, full fitting.
All right.
Well, thanks for having me. This has been awesome, and it was great to chat with you.
Yeah. I agree, and I will talk to you very, very, very soon.
Yes, we'll talk soon.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.